Family Business is episode 5 of Vince McMahon's documentary, Mr. McMahon, on Netflix. Myself and Alex Steve are in a hot seat, and we're going to be discussing all the claims, allegations, and all sorts going through this episode on the series. Your thoughts of this one, Family Business?
Not so controversial as I thought it was going to be. Like, compared to some of the other episodes so far, this is not so much controversial. This is more of an insight into, I think, Vince's mindset, whether it be character or how he personally is in real life. I don't know. It's probably, like I said, there are some unique talking points about this, but then again, there are some stuff that they really did skip over in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, and we're not going to skip over anything in this episode. We're going to be diving in deep on this one. We can promise you that one. But obviously, we get to hear about as well the introductions to Shane and Stephanie, almost the internal battle, if you will, of who will be potentially the next one that would be taking over Vince as well, their wishes and wants as well for that. So lots to dive into. Obviously, we can talk about Vince McMahon. Obviously, the first comment that comes through this, rebelling against the first 12 years of his life, creating a life where he's untouchable and invulnerable to outside forces. He wants to be in control of his own destiny. Knowing what we know now, that just makes me feel a bit uncomfortable just reading that sentence out. But apparently, with a Playboy interview, he did discuss openly his upbringing, domestic abuse from his stepdad, and actually alluded to sexual abuse from his mother, which obviously we get to see her as well on the shot there. Your thoughts to the opening part of this episode?
Apart from the fact that, but who buys Playboy for the interviews? That's kind of like the biggest thing I took as well. Was like, seems like a really niche magazine to be having an interview for. But yeah, and obviously we know back in like the 50s and 60s that the stuff obviously like this happened, but it wasn't exactly like a talked about subject. It wasn't exactly something that was portrayed in mainstream news. It was kind of like, it's just a very like niche thing that no one talks. But then again, like I said, because of that, there isn't the kind of support systems in place that there is today for people to go and see psychiatrists and all that kind of stuff, just to try and help you deal with the emotional, physical, mental damage that something like that would happen to you. And I mean, again, I think I alluded to this in the first episode, that it almost seems like some of that has affected Vince 50, 60 years later, and some of the stuff that he's maybe thought of and portrayed on TV, or even just some of the stuff he's actually been accused of and stuff like that.
No, that's a really good point you just made there. Obviously, like, it's so different to today, and obviously it would have such a big impact, I imagine, on his life, obviously having that sort of difficult upbringing. But he does kind of make a quote about himself, obviously said, like, you know, he's afraid to look backwards as well. So it feels like it must be something that does play on his head. He always moves forwards. He said, you know, like the abuse you used to receive, you know, like if you're still breathing at the end of it, if you're still living, he treated it like you won, which for me was a very interesting quote. Like, it's always a thing of winning, it feels for Vince McMahon. But he does say and says, well, when you were abused as a kid, the tendency is then for you to abuse. And his opinion is that that's just a cop-out. He doesn't subscribe to that. Anything that happens to you, get rid of it. Throw the fuck back there and move forward. I mean, obviously, some of the Wall Street Journal, which we'll talk about in episode 6, may counter some of that with those allegations that have come out. But at the same time, obviously, you know, like you said there, he's not happy to look backwards. He doesn't want to think about what's happened in the past. He seems to be someone that just thinks forward. So clearly it does have that impact, like you've suggested there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the principal idea of it. Like, anything you go with, just leave it in the past, move on, just carry on. Like, that's generally how I tend to be. Like, I don't have a tendency to dwell on things in life. Like, I just feel like that life is too short, like me personally, that I just don't really want to dwell on stuff. I'd rather just carry on, forget about it, and move on. So, like I said, I like the idea of it. But the problem is like, you've been producing a TV show for like 30 plus years, and we've seen some of this crazy stuff be put out onto telly, and it's kind of like, it's hard to ignore that you clearly have some sort of trauma that's not been dealt with when you've put that stuff out on TV. Because I mean, dude, anything in their right mind, like there's a story coming up in this episode that they skip over. Like, what is your mindset to think that that's good TV? That's the thing I don't get, which is why I think he's clearly I've repressed something, or he's just like, I don't know, almost like accepting that how he is normal, and like whatever's happened to him doesn't matter on, or doesn't play into account of how he's been over the last like 60 years.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting, and I know exactly what storyline you're referring to as well. By the way, it's quite clear. It's one person's name, which we'll be discussing later on in the video. Which this documentary seems to skip over. Like I say, we will not be doing that. But just one other note as well. Look, obviously these are allegations that have been brought. I mentioned the Wall Street Journal already, but the quote was saying, at the end of it, when he received abuse, if you're still breathing, if you're still living, you won. That just makes me feel a bit uncomfortable with what's come out since. I really, it's not a good feeling for the mind. But we do move on in the episode. We find out how Shane McMahon got into the business. Obviously, being Vince's son, he was interested in the world early doors, and he wanted to be like, in the business part of the business, full on inside of it, not just someone that was just there. He wants to take part in everything. But he earned his stripes. He was backstage, soaking it all in. He was a referee. He was taking people's jackets to the back. He was a ring announcer. Shane did a lot of stuff really to break his way through before getting onto TV.
Yeah, almost like he was trying to follow in Vince's steps, like he was trying to pay his dues and, do you know what I mean, work his way up and get to, I imagine his end goal in life would have been to essentially take over from Vince and become CEO of WWE. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us probably thought of that at the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially when Shane was a prominent character on TV, like a lot of us probably sat and thought, imagine this guy's going to run this company one day. And it's kind of like you sit there and think, this is 25 plus years ago that we're thinking this. And it's like, oh, I wonder what it'll be like. And then obviously everything that's obviously happened in the last 2 years, and they've ended up selling the business. And the McMahon family is was not even part of the company anymore, because I don't think Stephanie's even got a role at the minute. I think she's just Triple H's husband at this point, and it's kind of like the fact that there isn't a McMahon associated with the WWE for the first time in like 60 plus 70 years, something like that, just seems a bit insane. But yeah, just like, again, the fact that he's tried to pay his dues and work his way up, I can respect it, but unfortunately for Shane, it just seems like, if anyone, he struggled the most being brought up in the business.
Yeah, it felt like it as well. Obviously, a lot of things can sort of intertwine with episode 5 and 6 with this. You could dive into really with Shane McMahon in one here, but Shane obviously wanted to do, I guess, things the right way, work his way up, show that he wasn't just handed the opportunity, which was fun to see. And eventually, he would obviously get himself on TV. Some of the big storylines, the Mean Street Posse and stuff, be aligned with Vince as well, and do all Vince's bidding as well at the time. So he had a good sort of on-screen presence, and Stephanie would join him about a year later, again always wanted to be in WWE, but people judged on who her father was, and then she got her character not long after college, and she was almost willing to do anything as well. She was happy to be in whatever format she was booked, and obviously it wasn't too long before she was involved in the storyline with Test, where she was going to get married with Test. And obviously that's the one which apparently there was no ending to. This is something I didn't know. Triple H came up with the idea of the end of this wedding because of the fact that they didn't have the payoff, and the payoff in the end was that Triple H would abduct Stephanie, and she'd already been married in Vegas whilst sort of unconscious and passed out, and obviously it came with a famous line then, not if they consummated the marriage, it was how many times, which once you see, then everyone's got a smile on their face with that one as well. It's a bit creepy when you look back into it these days. It's not really it's not one for a PG market, let's just say.
Yeah, very like, obviously, again, a thing that hasn't aged well in the last 20 years, and how much of an issue that was, especially like 10 years ago. But I found this, like, I know that Stephanie had worked for the company as a child because I believe she was a model for the catalogs for the kids' clothing back in the day, like when they used to run the WWE catalog or the magazine or whatever. Yeah, she was actually one of the models they would use for the kids' clothing. But yeah, obviously getting in again at a young age, I thought her and Test were genuinely a couple. I thought it was kind of like how Triple H and China used to be, like they used to date. So for the same as you, for this story to turn around and go, oh well, there was no end to it, and it was just kind of like, oh, this is where we're going to go with it, I found that weird, because I genuinely thought those two were an item.
Absolutely, yeah, I can understand that. But actually, it would be the real life partnership of Triple H and Stephanie once they had their on screen stuff together. Obviously, it would be revealed not long afterwards that Stephanie was, of course, in on the act, obviously turning on Vince McMahon at the Armageddon 1999 pay per view. And obviously, that started the McMahon Helmsley alliance, of course, at that time. And obviously, they get a lot of time on TV together then, and that allowed them to get to know one another perfectly. Vince always said that, someone like Paul Levesque would be the perfect person for Stephanie, but Shane wasn't really on board with this sort of stuff. And Vince went like, yeah, someone like him, but not actually him, would be the case. So Shane wasn't really on board with this to start off with, because Stephanie wasn't allowed to date the wrestlers. But hey, an exception was made here, and obviously a partner for life found in Paul Levesque, Triple H.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who that benefits more, really, if it benefits Stephanie or I suppose Triple H, because he's currently like chief, head of creative for WWE. So obviously, I think that's worked out best for him. But hey, in regards to Shane, dude, it's the typical big brother thing, like looking out for your little baby sister. Do you know what I mean? And obviously, again, being brought up in the industry at that time, he obviously knew what a lot of the boys were about in the locker room, and kind of like, I don't really want my sister to be a part of that. So can totally understand it.
Yeah, totally understand it. And obviously, it turned out, though, that it was true love and it prevailed. They were going to get married, wasn't they? It was due 6 days after the No Mercy pay-per-view in 2003, which Vince actually suggested the idea to Stephanie. How about having the pay-per-view, having the wedding, on pay-per-view? Like, it would be massive. Everyone would tune into it. Got a resounding no, of course, where then Vince's reaction, apparently, to this was selfish. You're so selfish for not having the wedding on pay-per-view. Instead, booked himself versus Stephanie in the infamous, it was I Quit match, wasn't it? It was like a hardcore I Quit match. Yeah, Street Fight I Quit match, yeah, which of course, then it was the big worry, obviously, with if Stephanie would get hurt 6 days before the wedding, which Linda did say if anything happened, she would divorce Vince on the spot. Thankfully, it looked brutal. I think the storyline and angle was brutal, but thankfully, Stephanie went unscathed when it came to her wedding.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, dude, just insane the fact that you put your daughter through that 6 days before a wedding. Like, and obviously Linda threatens him with the whole black eye thing. And I mean, even the fact that he touches it, like, this is the only time with, like, he really actually, I think, otherwise, apart from the first episode, this is the only other time he really talks about his marriage to Linda. And obviously he turns around and says that he was attracted to the fact that Linda was middle class. And I'm like, that's the most niche thing, the most weirdest thing to be attracted to someone by, is the fact that they're middle class. And then, and then to be fair, he said that he promised her it would never be a dull moment. He's pretty damn right there. It was never a dull moment, unfortunately, like, for good and bad things.
He didn't lie. He didn't lie there. No, never a dull moment. And he promised he'd always love her as well, obviously. And we got an introduction to Linda. Obviously, the fact that she was probably the most shy about being on camera, but would play her role. Obviously, she's the chief executive officer of the company at the time, obviously. She handled business while Vince handled creative and the vision. But Vince always said, look, we've got myself on screen as a character, Shane as a character, Stephanie has one. It only feels right, Linda, that you have one as well. And obviously she did play her part occasionally, even though perhaps the acting skills weren't as strong as the rest, and that was said by her as well. But she was involved in an infamous storyline. Obviously it went into what people renowned as the greatest pay-per-view of all time, WrestleMania X7, WrestleMania 17. Of course, was Vince McMahon versus Shane McMahon, father versus son, the street fight. And this is all based over the idea that Vince wants a divorce from Linda. Linda is then on medicine or depressants, let's say. She's being drugged up the whole time. And that's when Vince starts having an affair with Trish Stratus, kissing her in front of Linda McMahon, which I'm just going to say my opinion on this piece, really. Obviously, not the greatest storyline ever when you look back at it. Yes, I know there's a big payoff at WrestleMania X7 with the Linda finally gets out the chair and kicks McMahon between the balls. Yes, hurrah. That is a cool moment on that show. But still, the idea of, like, are we kissing Trish in front of Linda because of how despicable the guy could be? With everything we sort of now have seen and been alluded to and sort of seen everything that's come out through these different bits, it's kind of like, it almost feels like a fantasy played on camera for Vince a little bit, where Trish saying, oh, give me a spanking and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know, he's writing his own story, and it's just, I don't know, it's how they want you to think, but I mean, Trisha said as well, it's how they want us to think, but I don't know. I don't know.
The fact that it gets worse from here on is the more worrying point. Like, I genuinely cringe when I'm watching Trish kiss Vince, because I'm like, oh my god, that's just because, you know, obviously they oversell it, and there's like they're licking each other's faces and doing all that nasty stuff they normally do to make it look more worse than it is on TV. But I actually thought the more interesting part was, now you'll have to remind me on this, because someone says that Linda was game for it, but I don't think it was Linda that said that. So it was like someone else said that Linda was up for this storyline, and I'm like, unless you hear it from the horse's mouth, so I kind of think otherwise, really, because it's like, do you know what I mean? They've had the opportunity to interview Linda, and they turn around and go, Linda, were you okay with your husband kissing another man? They're like, it might have actually been her. You'll have to remind me, but like, I'm sure it was someone else.
I can't actually remember, which is not good. We're doing a review. But there you go. I've seen it twice. I still don't know. But what I would say is that if you're uncomfortable with the kissing segment, you must have been quite uncomfortable with the barking like a dog segment. Obviously, when Vince got Trish to do that in the middle of the ring, it wasn't even going down well back in 2001. A lot of people were very against this. This was around the period that ratings started to drop dramatically with the treatment of women. Obviously, this isn't really featured so much in the documentary here or the series, but obviously the Trish segment, barking like a dog, is one, but then the brutal beat down of Lita with a steel chair, I think from Austin a few weeks later. Raw's ratings never recovered after that. It dropped dramatically. So obviously that says it in told from the time. Obviously coming back 20 odd years later, it's still no better. But of course, Trish seems to be defending the storyline. It's like, we understand it will be misinterpreted, but it's like, what else are you supposed to think? It's a really awful segment.
I mean, I originally thought that this was actually punishment for something. I'm sure I'd seen something on another documentary where they turned around and said that was Trish's punishment. Like, it might have even been for the next part that they talk about. Like, I could have sworn that was her punishment for not, like, do you know what I mean, doing a storyline or something like that. But yeah, don't even make her get down to her underwear and crawl around as a dog in the ring. Does that happen? I tried to blur it out, honestly, the whole Trish Stratus dog barking like a dog thing. But yeah, man, it's obviously degrading, and yeah, and obviously you have the Austin beat down with Lita, like I said, a couple of weeks later. It's like, it's a very painful time to watch for women wrestlers.
Yeah, it's not good treatment of them at all. And obviously, yeah, I mean, she is stripped down to, I believe, her underwear, and obviously Vince does say that she should take off more, which obviously we don't see further into it after that. But
I'll tell you what, I will give props for Trish, though, for the fact that Trish managed to go through that and still be regarded as one of the best women's wrestlers WWE has ever had. I think she deserves massive props for that, because to go through all that crap, all that storylines, kissing Vince, I'm pretty sure she was part of the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club as well. Like, to go through all that, still put on banger after banger of wrestling matches, and then to still go down as one of WWE's greatest women's wrestlers ever, just props to her.
Yeah, do you know, it's a really good point. Obviously, coming through the other side, like, she wasn't she came in as a model, didn't she? She didn't come in as a pro wrestler as such when she came in. So she learned on the job as well. And obviously, she got very good. She became a women's champion. Like you say, she took the game to levels it hadn't been to that point. So, you know, like you say, 6-7 time women's champion. So credit to her. Like you say, she did come through the other side of it. But we mentioned about the treatment, obviously not so good. And I thought Dave Meltzer had a great comment, because the fan base didn't seem let's say, so sympathetic to women back at the time either. And obviously, he said, you know, they fantasized over hot women. It's that sort of 18 to 34 demographic, but they always resented them as they could never get girls like that. It was kind of cool to those guys to see them sort of be degraded in front of them, which I thought was a really well worded sentence from Meltzer in a way, because of the fact that, you know, I can kind of see in a way the argument, because it's, you know, you look back at it, obviously, why were, you know, the men cheering for in such a degrading way? Because that's the way a lot of the times it was done. It wasn't done of the fact of, oh, I want to, you know, do this because I want to do this. It was always the way of forcefulness, and yet the crowd would cheer it. It's a very interesting time when you look back 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's a very generational period of
Mm.
male TV and what we were. But then, I mean, is it surprising? Like, it almost was a case of it was that was the evolution of the next step of women's wrestling in WWE. It was kind of right. Well, we've done all this crap before. How can we evolve it to be even more crap and even more degrading? And like obviously the fan base is the fan base. They've been watching the product for. You tend to find that the reoccurring viewer has obviously been watching wrestling for so many years that they're kind of used to all this stuff, and it's kind of like almost ingrained into their brains with wrestling. Like, oh, this is how the women get treated in wrestling. It's okay. Do you know what I mean? I'm not making it as an excuse, but I'm just talking about for a period. It's kind of like, especially like, for instance, you and me, like obviously at that time we're probably what, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, 18, however old. Do you know what I mean? We're not even adults at that time. And it's kind of like, this is how the world is being portrayed to us through sports entertainment. And it's kind of like, and it, like, I hate to say it, but it probably ruined a load of sort of mid to late teens when they hit adolescence, because that's how they thought that women were supposed to be treated.
I mean, the thing is, like you say, it's normalized, isn't it? It's kind of like, you know, I mean, thankfully, you know, you'd watch it on the TV, but you wouldn't treat people like that. Do you know what I mean? I like to hope a lot of people wouldn't have done so. But I can understand what you mean. It's like it's an influence into how people are and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I suppose if they do go out in the real world and they try and talk to someone that they think is, I don't know, as attractive as some of the women that are there, and they don't have that sort of luck or whatever, and they think, well, this is their way. Yeah, it's just
grab a steel chair. Just batter over head with a steel chair.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's a special time. I suppose, and thankfully, it's a time of the past, I think, is the best way to put it. And thankfully, things are a lot better today. But you know, obviously, you know, Shane said this as well, that you know, when it came to Linda in these sort of storylines, he wasn't a fan of it either. You know, Linda is sacred to him as well. And when it came to the match, also at WrestleMania X7, he wasn't really sort of too keen on getting physical with his dad. So his dad clocked him a few times at the start of the match, and then Shane didn't find it so bad after all.
Yeah. I don't look, dude. Vince essentially done the right thing to get the right reaction that he wanted, but yeah, I mean, we basically learned that Vince is essentially a mummy's boy. Do you know what I mean? And that's a good thing. Like, I would hope that someone was at least had a thought in the back of their head, being like, my mother shouldn't be, do you know what I mean, degraded like this or portrayed like this on national TV for people to see. So I had a lot of respect for Shane throughout this whole storyline. But yeah, just to go with the Vince thing, like, yeah, dude, Vince is doing what Vince does to get what he needs, which is he wants Shane to bite and to have a fight with him. And the fact that Shane has a black eye like 60 seconds in is just shocking.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. Add some question marks. But I mean, when it comes to Vince, nothing's off limits. If he makes money, then it's on the table, and it doesn't seem to matter about anybody else. Bonnie Hammer, USA Network, said Vince was good at blurring lines on what was reality and what was believable or not. And yeah, I mean, to be fair, that's a very good point with some of the things we've discussed already here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but then again, I think, again, a lot of us are in that period where we know that some of it is fake, but we obviously tend to think that some of it's still real, and like maybe it's, like I said, sort of pre-adult minds that we're not too sort of clued up on how the real world is, which is why it was so easy for him to blur that line, especially with the demographic that he's aiming for.
Absolutely. And obviously we're talking about sexualization with women as well in pro wrestling. Obviously Sabre was a very popular figure, obviously, in the late 90s, sort of 98, 99. And obviously every time that she was on screen, apparently, like, she was having like some of the biggest segments on Raw. The only person topping it was Stone Cold Steve Austin. But she sued the company because she left in her prime, really, in her peak, you would say, in 99. Obviously the sexual harassment claims came from Sabre, but she would later return to the company in 2003 after there was just to check now, it was a settled lawsuit in the same year in 1999. So it sort of allowed for, I suppose, things to I guess to blow over, but she would return in 2003, and apparently she came back in an affair with Vince McMahon. So Sable was straight back in a position of what she wouldn't do off camera, but would do on camera. And obviously, Vince doesn't remember this lawsuit either.
Yeah, how can you forget someone was trying to sue you for $110 million? I'd remember every detail about their person, their height, their age, their weight, their eye color. Do you know what I mean? The fact that he just nonchalantly goes, "No, I don't remember this at all," and I'm like, "Are you crazy?" And I think even Stephanie pipes up. Stephanie's part of the initial storyline. Like when they first bring her back on TV and she's straddled across Vince's desk, and Stephanie even turns around and says she tried to sue us for X amount of millions of dollars. And like the fact that he just goes, "I don't remember that," I just find that insane.
I almost feel like it's if I was to speculate, I almost felt it's almost like, but she came back to work for me. So does it? I won again.
Yeah.
I feel there's this sort of like a theme of this episode. Like I win. Like it's all about him winning, and that's what matters. It's almost like Sable's the loser because it doesn't matter with the lawsuit whether it was it was settled. So it doesn't matter if that's a win or loss. The fact she's back working for me is that victory. But you have to remind me of the person's name, the surname Mazer.
So it would be Sharon Mazer. She's the author of Pro Wrestling, Sport and Spectacle.
Thank you very much, because she had a very interesting quote here and a very interesting dialogue. It's saying, because in the ring we can be entertainingly appalled by what Vince says or does, but we have plausible deniability because it's just a wrestling storyline. Over the end of the day, it's just performance. We take for granted Vince is booking Mr. McMahon in his own personal story to appeal to us, which I thought was really interesting when you put that on, piece that all together, because it's like, what we're watching is just performance, it's just TV, but ultimately, end of the day, he's the one booking it. He's the one with the pencil. He's making himself and these other people do these things with him.
It is, but then the other thing as well, like especially after watching the first 4 episodes of this documentary, you go back to the previous one where they talk about, is there much difference between Mr. McMahon and Vince McMahon? And basically, everyone apart from Vince says not really. One's just like an over-exaggerated or an over-inflated version of the same guy. And that, I think, that's what's so good about this, is that it's like, do you know what I mean? It's planted that seed in your head of like, this is how everyone thinks of Vince McMahon, and then stuff like this happens, and then we obviously get this, like we get this in our 2024. We're like, you kind of sit there and go that he's very good at doing all this, but it's like she says that he's very good at blurring the lines, but looking at the way this show's been produced, it's like he's not blurring the lines at all. This is just generally how Vince is, and if the fact this wasn't a TV show, you'd pretty much have to think that he'd be doing this anyway.
Or at least attempting to be. That's the way it's implied.
Yeah,
it's implied that way anyway. So that's how we
keyword applied.
Yeah, that's exactly. But we go back then to another Playboy interview there for the articles. Obviously, Vince talked about obviously his like affairs in real life. He was sort of straight shooting, saying about all this stuff that with cheating stuff that, and look, he learned obviously how emotions were as well when you're married, which again, very. How did you not think this stuff before?
Yeah, again, like, this is why I think these things went so under the radar, because I don't remember either of these Playboy interviews. And the fact that, like I said, they talked to Vince about it, and his whole idea on marriage is kind of almost like it's a business. Do you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't treat it's like it's just something you do. You get married, you have kids. That's, you know what I mean? It's like almost like a business model to him. Like it's not. It was almost like it was just something that he had to do, and not something he necessarily wanted to do. Was the impression that I got.
It could very well be, obviously. Obviously, he must have felt something. He said he was attracted to her when she was at younger times, obviously. Yeah. But obviously, as time has sort of gone on, it feels like that these affairs are have crept in and stuff. And and obviously it doesn't seem like the Linda was the top priority after a while. And obviously, I believe they're separated now. So obviously, I guess it's things never really recovered from that side of things, I guess. But I mean, we talk about his monogamous lifestyle. Obviously, his monogamous relationship with Linda. I think Paul Heyman sums it up best that he only actually had one real monogamous relationship in his entire life, and that's his passion, which was the pro wrestling, and that's what his love was, and that was his master. Vince doesn't own the business owns Vince, and he super serves it with his heart and passion for life. I thought that was an excellent quote from Paul Heyman.
Yeah, because it was almost as if like pro wrestling is the only thing Vince can out and out control.
Yeah.
Which is why he probably treats it better than any relationship that he's had, if you know what I mean, because he's the one in full control. Essentially, the business can't say no to him because it's his business, it's his company, it's what he's done for all this time. And yeah, it's again, like I said, this episode is just all about Vince's, like, the insightfulness and the mindset of what Vince goes through. And yeah, like Heyman just hits the nail on the coffin with that. It just 100%, like, the only thing that you could probably believe is that his love for pro wrestling or sports entertainment is what something he passionately loved.
Absolutely. And Vince does say, by the way, that storylines were totally unrelated to his personal life or affairs. So that's the word from Vince. Yeah, we'll take it for what it is. But no, I agree with you with all the stuff you just said there with regards to Vince and his relationship, obviously, with pro wrestling, and that's something that's taken over his entire life. Yeah, he had the control of that, and obviously very different. But obviously, as WWE went to go public, that would allow him to dip his toes in other areas. Obviously, winning the Monday Night War, obviously buying WCW, which was dealt with in 3 business days, bought for $2.5 million, which that was him and the having after the Turner and Time Warner merger, because that was what officially killed WCW, according to this documentary and Eric Bischoff as well. Probably is a bit of the takeaway as well from the Who Killed WCW series that was out earlier this year. But you had something to say about WCW that's worth a belief for today.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like, just out of interest, I obviously did for whole inflation just to see how much that would have cost them if they bought WCW today. And surprisingly enough, for as little as $5 million in today's money is what it would have cost them to buy a whole wrestling business. And you think that they've just secured, like, what is it, $5 billion off of Netflix or something for something stupid? Like, I don't know how much the deal is with Netflix, but it's a stupid amount of money. And the fact that they bought a whole wrestling company for that much is just insane.
It's madness when you think back how much of a threat WCW was as well at that point. It's insane, really. But obviously, other things were to be done as well. Obviously, the restaurant in Times Square, WWE New York, obviously, which unfortunately failed. Casino business failed as well, and obviously starting the XFL, which let's be honest, had a very successful first week, but all in all was a complete disaster.
I found this quite funny because this relates to, again, back in the previous episode where Shane wanted to buy. Was it the previous episode where he wanted to buy UFC, or was that this episode he wanted to talk about?
In this episode.
Okay, let me just. All right, so before we jump to that bit, the fact that I know there's a quote that came out that Vince said where, like, he didn't want to buy the UFC because this is obviously not in this documentary, but it was like, this is what happens when you do real fighting and you can't forecast, like, you can't, like, essentially pre-plan the winners because it's real fighting, which is why he never wanted to get into the UFC. And it's exactly the same how XFL turned out for him, because you can put however many guys are on a football field. If they're crap at the game, then the product's crap, unfortunately. Like, no matter how many bells and whistles and how many cheerleaders and how many pyro and how much, like, celebrity endorsements you have turned up for the first week, if the product is crap, no one's coming back for the second week.
It seems to be the case. I think by the end of the season, it dropped 75% in viewership, which, very painful. Only lasting one season as well. It was going to be the alternative. Vince didn't know much about football, but like, he kind of showed a little bit.
Yeah, and then the fact that they don't touch on this in the documentary, but then he tries to do it a second time round, and then pandemic unfortunately does the nail in the coffin for him and cancels out his second ever attempt at starting the XFL. And then I believe the Rock bought it, and then the Rock took it over. And I don't actually know if it's any successful or not, but I've not seen much of it since its initial launch.
I think it's done a season now. How successful or how it has been, I'm not quite sure, but it's probably had better luck this time round, as the fact I think it is making a return, but don't quote me on that. Obviously, then moving on to business, obviously the WWF becomes WWE after the World Wildlife Fund have their take on the name WWF. Obviously, WWE tried to fight it, but it was never going to win because the Wildlife Fund had the name WWF for a lot longer than obviously World Wrestling Entertainment did, so they were kind of forced to do the change. But Vince kind of just accepted it, didn't want to do it, but whatever, it's had to be done. We're entertainment after all, so that's the name, and it has been the name now for well over 20 years. To be honest, kind of got over it at this point. I just think WWE, even when I was supposed to think WWF, I still will say WWE.
Yeah, I mean, the fact the old logo, or the fact that they took the F off of it and could have just added an extra line for an E. I mean, I suppose nowadays it looks aesthetically more pleasing. I'm kind of glad. Like, I was like, why didn't they just add an extra line? I could never get over that as a kid, but yeah, same as you do. 20 years later, I'm kind of over it now.
Same. And I was the slogan "Get the F out" as well worked really, really well back in the day. Yeah. So worked for the time. And obviously, we mentioned about Vince winning. Vince has to win. People have to come back. Hulk Hogan made the return as well, and was actually in the dream match against The Rock, Icon versus Icon at WrestleMania X8. Obviously, that one was taking place in Canada. They made a mention, obviously, the two legends, the special moment, the big deal. Obviously, we know it's a very special match, but for me, whatever in this documentary, it's not really an interesting part for me, if I'm being honest.
It doesn't even main event, does it?
No, it's deemed as a main event, but doesn't main event. The main event of that show was Triple H versus Chris Jericho.
Just right, yes. I thought it was Chris Jericho. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it is what it is. It's it's one of those, it's one of just them dream matches, and the fact that Vince has the opportunity to put it on and do it is right. But like everyone, like I said, most people forget that there was another match afterwards. I think a lot of people tend to think that was the main event of it at 18.
Yeah, which it wasn't. It felt like a main event, but it wasn't. I also love as well, like they always discuss about how they changed the match on the fly and stuff. Like, Rock, we love you, Rock. But tonight it's all about Hulk. It's like I don't know. There's a lot of ego for me in that when I'm watching that, if I'm being brutally honest. But
yeah. I mean, this is kind of what you expect from Rock and Hogan, I suppose. Like they obviously, especially at the time where Rock is the biggest star. And he's like on the cusp of breaking into Hollywood, and then Hogan is obviously that adored fan favorite that at the time, do you know what I mean, could do no wrong in the eyes, even though he did come back as part of the NWO. But yeah, it's just one of the moments, and again, another stroke of luck that Vince again seems to just fall upon and has the opportunity to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And Meltzer goes on the say as well, like with Hogan coming back as well. Every decision eyes towards business, and it's a challenge for Vince. If you knock him, he wants to prove that you'll go back to him. It's almost the case, like, if you leave the company and you do something that upsets him, you're more likely to go back because he wants that challenge after all. We see Bret Hart making the return, obviously, for WrestleMania 26. We see Eric Bischoff in WWE in general, obviously, in 2002. Business comes first, but business did go down after 2002. Less interest after the loss of WCW. Austin left. Obviously, The Rock would then go into Hollywood in 2004. So then we had the birth of the ruthless aggression era. Obviously, the birth of John Cena as well. Obviously, John Cena having the match against Kurt Angle, mainly because The Undertaker was unavailable for a SmackDown scheduled taping, which was interesting to learn that note. Of course, Cena had the match with Kurt Angle. Said it was great because it's all this sort of different era. Everyone had their real names, got to experience and show their personalities. But Cena was just a bit boring. Cena wasn't going to survive. He was close to being fired up until the point that he joined some guys rapping on a tour bus and literally shredded everybody. Didn't know Stephanie was on the bus, and she heard and said, "Could you do that on TV?" And he decided to do it on TV, and he got over, and that's when he got Vince's attention.
Dude, again, fortuitous piece of luck again with John Cena. The fact that, like you said, he's on the verge of getting fired at this point. There is nothing interesting about him, and he just happens to stumble upon freestyle rapping, and henceforth the Doctor of Thugonomics is born, and he will go on to release an album which still has quite a banging tune on it that I won't lie, I do have on my Spotify list because I think it's just a quality little banging tune, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but yes, I am that much of a loser apparently. But yeah, just in fact, the character's born from that. I mean, everyone knows that. And like you said, I think the interesting thing was that he got his chance because Taker wasn't available for a SmackDown show. I think it was just like, that's a nice tidbit to know about. Do you know what I mean? That's almost like a quiz question that you're going to ask in the like you're going to ask in the future. Who did John Cena replace in his debut? Do you know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah. Out of interest, what's the name of that track?
It's a bad, bad man.
Spotify, everybody. Google, wherever you get your music, go and give it a listen. Maybe you'll be a part of the Chain Gang as well. Maybe part of the C Nation. You have to wait and see. But at the same time,
you do have it on Spotify. I can tell.
I don't think I've listened to Cena's album, I'll be honest, but I'll make an effort just for this to go and make a listen to it afterwards. I need a long journey in the car, and I think I'll be all right. But Cena actually said though he saw things he didn't like and he crafted them into his character. He compared himself to Vince with Mr. McMahon.
Yeah, like I thought that was clever yet concerning, because it's kind of like we know how obviously Vince's character has been portrayed and what happens in the future. So the only thing is I can do, like, what doesn't Cena like about rappers? Like that's the only thing I couldn't work out. Like at this point, you know what I mean? Eminem's one of the biggest stars in the world, and I don't know, maybe it's just the John Cena thing.
I don't know. It's something we needed an extra question on that one, I think, with it. But you know, McMahon was, if he thought of something, he thought it was something he needed to try, which led to the question: did they ever go too far in storylines? Oh, did they? Fuck, they did indeed. Let's talk about it. Katie Vick. They breezed over this very quickly. They didn't want to get the one.
Like 5 seconds, if that, of a video clip was shown, and I was like, "Oh wow, we're really not going to talk about that creative decision." That was like, it's just so stupid. And like I said, you go back to the stuff that he'd done in the previous episode. He goes, "Oh, we didn't kill anyone, Pillman. We didn't kill anyone, buried alive match. We didn't use guns, Brian Pillman. We didn't use swords, choppy PP." Do you know what I mean? And the fact that it's like he used, like I'm very grateful that I don't remember a lot of the Katie Vick story. Like I know of it, and like I said, my memory is not the best. I'm sure if I maybe had been, because obviously Ruthless Aggression PG era, I kind of zoned out at this point, so I'm not as avid of a viewer, so I kind of missed the key story bits in this. But I obviously remember the whole, he's making out with a woman in a coffin and she's supposed to be dead, and he's apparently got blood all over him, and you're like, what? I'm kind of like, at this point, I'm glad I stopped watching wrestling. Do you know what I mean?
It's it's sick. It's one of the worst storylines ever done. I don't remember it that well at this point. Obviously, you remember the clip, but I don't really remember much. I know it led to Triple H and Kane, I believe, was No Mercy, I want to say, in 2002, but not entirely sure. But there's been about 20 years of wrestling, enough alcohol gone through my system, but thankfully I think I've blocked it out enough. So not coming to a rewind anytime near for viewers if you're wondering. Not. But, they spent more time talking about Trish Stratus though, obviously, with time that she said no to Vince McMahon to kissing another female. She wondered, she was unsure she was punished because she lost the championship the next week, which happened just to be at WrestleMania 22 against Mickie James.
The thing is I find this ironically funny, that the fact that you and me both love that match in general at WrestleMania. It's like, it was like, I've expressed this to you, that I think this was the first women's match that I ever saw that I actually went, wow, that's actually great. I need to start watching more women's wrestling. And the fact that it comes off the back of her saying no to a lesbian kissing scene is just insane. Like the smallest thing happens and we get that good of a wrestling match is madness to me.
I mean, I think we were getting the match, but obviously the result changed. So I'd like to think the match still would have been good
Possibly,
either
yeah.
way. But
Yeah.
again, too far down the vault, unfortunately, not enough detail given to us. But speaking of storylines that perhaps would have gone too far, they asked the question to Stephanie McMahon, and she went, I can't tell you. I'm not going to tell you. Well, Mr. McMahon, Vince told us, apparently, Stephanie in the storyline would get pregnant. And Vince said his character, would have been the one who would have impregnated her.
The scariest part is he laughs it off like it's nothing. Like he was like the fact that he sits and goes, "Oh, I think she was supposed to be pregnant. I think it was supposed to be me, or my character was supposed to have been the father." And I'm like, he's really tried to kind of skate around it, but he's tried to talk about it, but skate around it in the most blandest way. And it was like, dude, you got to be some twisted guy to come up with a story idea like that.
So, shall we move on?
Let's do that.
I think we will just, if he's going to slide around it, I think we will as well, because it's another one of those storylines that I'm very glad didn't happen. This could have been into the Katie bit. Well, not quite Katie, but yeah, there's levels to this game, and it's all sick.
I don't know which would have been worse. Like the fact that the Katie Vick one was put on TV ultimately makes that one worse. But the fact that that was an idea makes that worse on so many more reasons, because that's something that should never have been thought of.
Neither should. I don't know. I still actually think Katie Vick. I can't believe I'm having to compare them and say which I think is worse. I mean, obviously,
I know.
Yeah,
it's mad.
It's moving on.
Disgusting.
Disgusting. We're moving on. Obviously, Stephanie finds it difficult to separate her dad, Vince, and the boss. Apparently, was a sentence that said all three very different in her life, even though it's the same person. Vince was hard on his kids. Shane wanted to be, wanted Vince to step aside when it got to the mid-noughties. Thought it was time, but that didn't happen. After all, it was Vince's business. And Shane was the black sheep of the family, was quoted there. And Shane wanted to prove himself. He wanted to say, look, I can do this. I can be the one that can perhaps run a company, show you later, come back and I can run this company. Obviously, UFC was having financial problems, and he wanted to grow that brand and, say, look, it's plug and play for the way it was. They had everything in place already to do, just make UFC that thing. But Vince didn't like the business model, as you mentioned, didn't like the idea of it was you couldn't be predetermined, this real fighting. He wasn't really into the ideas, so it never got done. And obviously he then said, well, if you wanted it Shane that badly, buy it yourself out of your money. You didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I can see where the resentment comes in, and obviously I think this leads into him leaving the business and stuff, and like the fact that they even show how much, I think they could have bought it for something as little as like $5 million again, and the fact that it's now like a $200 million or something, like 200 million or 200 billion, 200 million, like the value of the business is like 200 million, and obviously they're now, do you know what I mean, both owned by the same company, and it's kind of like your brain starts thinking, man, imagine what would have happened if Shane had like bought UFC, and like how, like, and obviously again, I think this is where we got Raw Underground from, by the way, I think this is where it stems from. You can imagine like that not only sports entertainment but real combat sports would have been like McMahon owned, and it would have kind of been like they have cornered a fighting style business models, do you know what I mean? And it's like it's their thing, and like, don't get me wrong, there's obviously other companies that come out and do it, but yeah, the fact that these two massive entities are now owned by the same company, but they could have been all those years ago, I think is like just insane. And like, yeah, I think it's Bonnie Hammer that says that Shane being the black sheep, I wouldn't necessarily maybe say he was the black sheep. Like, obviously Vince says that he holds his kids to a higher standard. I think more than anything, I think Shane was just eager to prove he could do it. And I think that's why, like, I think it was, the signs were clearly there that Shane wanted to take over WWE from Vince from very early stages, whereas Stephanie was kind of just existing at the time. And I think like he's scapegoated, and like that stuff happens because he's just so eager. This almost feels like it's the same role as how Vince wanted to prove to his dad that he could do it, and it just feels like we're repeating it's almost like a family trend now that we're just going through again.
I think there's a really good point there with the cycle of it, have how, like you mentioned with Vince with his father, now Shane with Vince. It's like it is like that. Do you feel Shane thought it was a divine right, obviously, that it should be him and not Stephanie?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like you can go back to heir to the throne. Do you know what I mean? Like the firstborn is meant to take over. Like that's something that goes back to like kings and queens. Do you know what I mean? Like that ruled world countries and stuff around the world hundreds and thousands of years ago. It's kind of like I'm the firstborn. It should be mine. You can kind of get that gist to it. I mean, I think for me, more importantly, it was if you had the love for the business. I think if you're going to take it over, like I wouldn't personally wanted to have seen Shane take it over just so he could almost say to his dad, "Oh well, I can do it as well." Like I would wanted to have seen either of them do it, where it was a case of like the business will then go on to thrive and become bigger and better, kind of like how it is now. But yeah, like I said, I don't blame Shane for wanting to be the heir to the throne.
No, absolutely not. And obviously, Shane would leave the company for 7 years. Obviously, 2009 he would go. Story from Paul Heyman kind of hinted to perhaps where something like that would have come about. Obviously, a blow up over creative, and Vince's reply to Shane's idea was, "Not while I'm alive." And literally, I think he handed him a knife or something, and literally pulled out. It was like, "Stick the dagger here." That's what you have to do to make that decision. And if you can't do that, then I will have to take that into consideration as well. Or you can buy me out if I don't get it out. If I don't get out of your way, be prepared to get rid of me the way I would have done to my father when he wasn't doing things my way at all. Again, going through the mindset there, obviously, like Vince managed to buy in the end the company, but obviously it sounds like that he had this ruthless nature, that he had intention of taking this company whether he was gonna get it or not.
I mean, dude, it's a point in 2022 where it's like we thought for the longest time Vince is gone. Like when he retired initially, and it was like, oh my god, like we're gonna get the Triple H era. And the fact that he could worm his way back in and be so manipulative, and it was kind of like, I don't know if it's an obsession or whether it's love at this point for the business. Like, he knows that Shane isn't going to have the money to buy his company out. And the fact that he tests to see if Shane has the crown jewels to actually do it and stick the knife in is a brave move, because obviously it depends on how well you know your kid, but it's also almost like it's that mentality again where it's like I will do anything to win. I will do anything to win, and he's going to extremes to make sure he wins. And that extreme is making his own child stab him with a steak knife because they were in a restaurant or wherever it is. And it's insane, man. Like you sit and think about it, like, who in their right mind tells their child to, like, it's almost like Vince is like a mafia don. Do you know what I mean? Like, he is the head of the mafia family, and it's kind of like his son is a made man. And it's like, you want to take my seat at the table, you want to run the family, then you've got to get rid of me. Dude, honestly, it sounds like this is a movie plot. That's how crazy it is.
Either that, or I feel like I'm listening to like a history lesson from like 1066 or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's crazy. Like, but like ultimately leads to another question from me to you here. Like Vince McMahon, all these sort of things about having to win all the time. Is this like is he booking his life like it's like a professional wrestling or something, like a match all the time? Because it always seems to be a thing of like, I must win. There's never is always this competitive nature, even over the most crazy sort of minimal stupidest things.
I mean, dude, it can be one of them. Like, is it a case that pro wrestling all this time has just been a way for Vince to portray stuff that he couldn't do. That's, do you know what I mean, stuff that's not socially acceptable in real world. That's something he can do on TV. Like it just leads to so many possibilities with Vince, because even like now, like even after everything that's just gone on, like dude, like I said, the guy is so confusing. And like I said, this episode does its best to try to give you an insight into the man itself, but you kind of don't come out any clearer at the end. Like you sit and learn all these tidbits about him, but we're essentially none the wiser. Like I said, was he using the business to portray himself or how he really felt about stuff? And it was all just some lunacy thing that, oh, well, if I can't do it in real life, I'll put it on TV and see if that gets a kick out of someone. Do you know what I mean? It's weird, but like he just is the weirdest guy. Yeah. And I don't think anyone like will ever be as infamous for like the most crazy, like, do you know what I mean? You go, if you from now till obviously we're 6 foot under, I don't think there's ever going to be another person in TV or film industry that's ever going to be as crazy and outlandish as what Mr. McMahon is. Do you know what I mean? He is truly like a he's like a generational character. Like he's essentially like the Julius Caesar of this like this dynamic. Do you know what I mean? It's like he's very. There's stuff that will be written about him for years. Like, I mean, this is only what we've got now. I can imagine that when he dies, there'll be more stories to come out of the woodwork, because there'll be no one there. Because like, you can't sue for defamation of character if the guy's dead. Do you know what I mean? So that's the real one I'm waiting for, is when he actually passes away. But do you know what I mean? The guy's in such good health. He's probably going to outlive me at this rate.
Yeah. To be fair. He's still in that shape, isn't he? He's still in the shape. Yeah. He still goes to the gym, and you still see him going into the work area. It's crazy, isn't it? But obviously, as a closing thing to finish off this, obviously we talk about how a lot of this has been about family business and how the family's got into it and stuff. And Vince's wording is kind of, he wouldn't recommend getting family involved in the business, because even if they may have, ideas and stuff, they don't have the passion and the same sort of ideologies as the creator, Vince McMahon.
I don't think necessarily the passion. I think it's the bollocks, excuse my French. I think it's essentially, if you've got the bollocks to do this stuff, because Vince was, although obviously when you hit that attitude era and they're starting to do more of the risky stuff, like the prime example is the stuff like the Sean stuff in his shorts thing. Do you know what I mean? Vince would have never thought of that. But once someone pushes the boat out for him, Vince is all there. He was like, right, well, we're going to sail this thing down the river. Do you know what I mean? We're going to go as far as we can with it. And that's kind of how Vince has almost lived his life. And like you said, there's no one in his family that's got the bollocks to do the same as him. No one, like, if you'd have put Shane or Stephanie or Linda in that same position, you wouldn't have got the same product. You know what I mean? You would have got a very almost withdrawn, like withheld person. Like you would have just got essentially a normal person's view on pro wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it's yeah, no, but I agree with you. I think that you're on the money. It's yeah,
he's a weird guy.
I think that's the best way to leave it, because obviously they mention about allegations will be on the way in episode 6. So I think that's the place we should leave it, and you should come and join us in episode 6. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share with a friend, and subscribe as well. Big thank you to the man next to me, NX Steve, who's dived into the weird world of episode 5 family business with us here today. We've given our best takes that we can with the claims and allegations and all sorts that have been put through on this episode, giving our reaction. And if you want to see more and you haven't seen the first 4 episodes, then hit the playlist option that's available on the screen right now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you for episode 6, The Finish.